Hello, and welcome to my cellar. I was just looking back through my YouTube thing, and I've been doing this over 3 years now. Good grief. Well, I'll either get better at it or I'll have to quit. I'm pumped up. I ran a game today online for 8 guys in the UK. Poor buggers are all locked down. We've been there already, done that. So I said, sure, okay. And so they all got together in their evening, my afternoon, and we played 8 players. We had a great time. Now, those of you who know about the Wheel of Blame, everybody gives me 2 things, and I write on the spot. I create the story with the things that I'm given. Like, let's see, I got a spoon. And the Queen Mum made an appearance. And murder monkeys. What else happened? Oh, we had some smelly cheeses. And we had an airship, a giant flying sausage, actually. Many jokes were made about that. We had honorable turnips. And we had custard. Well, they call it custard. We call it ice cream. And on that one, we also had dynamite. We had a good time, real good time. We started shade after 3 o'clock Eastern time, and we were done by about 7, and then we proceeded to BS for 25-30 minutes afterwards. But it was a great game, great players. We had a lot of fun, and watch on the tabletop events under the North Texas RPG Con. That's where I'll be posting the next time I'm going to do this, and I'll probably be doing these at least once a month. Okay, let's start out with all the wonderful suggestions I got to answer my question about getting the primer off the minis. I got might try soaking it in simple green, light spray of easy off oven spray. Guy bet used to use carburetor cleaner from AutoZone, but he says that he'd probably melt the plastic ones. And I got a couple of people recommended. LA's totally awesome, and I got some of. I went to the dollar store. I got a bottle of that for $1, and then I bought a package of 3 rather wimpy wire brushes, and for $1. And I soaked them in there overnight, and the stuff comes off of the wire brush just like a champ. Now, I also found a couple other ways to remove it once you've got it soaked, but you have to have a very deft touch. If you have a Dremel, you might try this. If you have the battery-powered Dremel, that's even better because you're less likely to mess it up. And I would not suggest trying this on an old lead figure, but get one of the small brass wheels, the brass wire brush wheels, and they'll do the same thing. However, I recommend the slowest speed possible if it's the electric one, the high speed if it's the battery powered one. If you get too high on the electric one, you're going to whisk the details right off. I found that the brushes were not that hard. Of course, they weren't. The figures weren't that big. But thanks for all your suggestions, and I found the Totally Awesome really works well. And I don't know that I'd do my way on lead. Like I said, I'd be very, very careful with the wire brush. If I was doing pure old lead figures, I think I'd just find a stiff toothbrush and do that. And might have to rub more, but you're less likely to obliterate the buttons or whatever. Okay, now we'll go into some questions. As a GM, do you award treasure by you rolling the dice or let the players roll for their treasure? In a scenario setting that I have prepared in advance, The treasure is already determined. I've already figured out what's there. Now, sometimes I roll. Sometimes I just select an arbitrary amount and say, okay, that's what's there. I don't let the players roll. There's not that many occasions the way I run a game that I wouldn't know what's coming up. And if the circumstance warranted and it was something unexpected that by circumstance had to be there, okay. I still don't know that I think I'd still roll the dice and make sure I was generous. If I was rolling low numbers, well then I'd boost it up to averages. If I ran high numbers, okay, ran high numbers. But um, I don't want to put that burden on the players. If they roll low numbers, it'll just blow them all out when they think about everything they could have had and didn't. So that's generally the way I do it. Of course, back in the early days, we thought we had to roll on every chart, every table for every room, and that's that's why sometimes it was like hitting the lottery. two, two sickly monkeys, and they got 11,000 pieces of silver. Um, so it's predetermined what's there, um, and I find that works very well. Now, this next one is rather interesting. At what point do I think a PC becomes an NPC? Is it just a power level, or is there a story reason usually? Well, in the old way of playing, old school, the little brown books, before first edition, we generally players became NPCs somewhere around level 9, level 10. We retired them. We went out and they accumulated their treasure, and so they essentially abstractly went off into the wilderness to hack out their what have you and whatever. And later on, perhaps, if the party needed the help, I might let them have a chance of trying to get one of these retired characters to come to give them a hand. But nowadays, people just keep playing until they're bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful. And pretty soon, they're walking around like KV-1 tanks. Everything's bouncing off and nothing's affecting them. I always felt the most fun was in the struggle getting there, not staying there and slaying stuff indiscriminately once you're there. I always enjoyed the struggle. I always thought it was much more fun out there living by my wits than not worrying about anything less than a fireball or a lightning bolt. Just my opinion, just the way I like to play the game. I would say as a DM, if you get a character that is become too much of a juggernaut, you tell the player it's time to retire them. And they can go on to, mythically, they can go on to somewhere else where the challenges are greater or whatever. Or at some point down the future, down the road in the future, if you've had enough of these players that you've retired, and then you get up a whiz bang super hard, Temple of Elemental Evil type thing, then you can bring those old badass guys out of retirement. That's the way I would do it. Sometimes the story level, yeah, you could write it into the story that perhaps the player character sacrifices a leg to a kraken to get away or whatever. They're not dead, but they can't go gimping around in the dungeon with you. So retire them. Let them continue to keep growing and studying and what have you, and deal with that off to the side when it becomes necessary. That's how I'd handle it. All right. Why isn't Morris Dancer a class in OD&D? I admit I had to go figure out what a Morris answer is. When I figured that out, I figured this question must be really tongue-in-cheek or just probably the lamest one I've gotten. Gary liked monks, bards, and other medieval classes. No, he didn't. Gary was not a fan of the monk, and he was not a fan of the bard. Bards, a little bit the old school bard where you had to do this for so many levels and that for so many levels. Yeah. But hey, those first edition bards were badass. A second edition bard insulted a first edition bard. Go find a burial plot for the second edition bard, because they couldn't do jack diddly squat. They had no thieving skills. They had no fighting skills. They were just fancy boys in fancy pants singing. That kind of bard, yeah, Gary liked the traditional troubadour type who had to be able to fend for himself, who had to be able to feed himself between gigs at various, traveling between various places. That one. Didn't like the monk. That was a sop to Brian. Okay, Brian was a big fan of the Kung Fu series. So how come Morris dancers don't get a dex bonus table in class description? Well, because they're silly and they're stupid. A bunch of men running around dancing for God knows what reason. Probably some pagan reason lost in the midst of time. I'm sure you must come from England, question and answer, because only a little insult intended. That sounds typically silly British. A Morris dancer. Why not have a troupe of Irish dancers? All long-legged, beautiful, red-headed females. Why? Because the whole party'd lose their shit. Most of them would fail their attention roles, and they would be beguiled. Maybe, on the other hand, Morris dancers might make a better monster. Well, they'd certainly be a nuisance if you ran into a bunch of them. So why don't they get a dex bonus? No. Have you come across any historical information to suggest that Morris dancers were itinerant teachers? No. I spent about 10 minutes looking up Morris dancers today online. I didn't find a single thing to recommend them, so no. Yeah, for relativity rights, yeah, they're a bunch of bacchanals. Okay, when developing my game, I used the original chainmail compatible attack tables for the classes in the Little Brown books as inspiration for a system where characters simply get more attacks as they level up, as much as an attack per level for fighters up to 9th level, instead of Thaco progressions, variable weapon damages, or any combat bonus from strength or dex. This works wonders for making fighters stay relevant through a campaign, keeping the magic users in check. Monsters tend to follow the same rules, so even at high levels, a character can be shredded in after 2 unlucky rounds of combat. It's a very different feel, though, compared to a standard D&D rule set. I wonder how the game would look if it had taken such a quantity over quality approach to fighting ability progression. Well, yeah, it'd certainly be a different game. It certainly wouldn't have been the game that Gary and Dave set out to design, because I knew both of them, and I know both of them, and their historical interests were in fencing and fighting and swords and pole arms and all that good stuff. And it would certainly be a different game. Hit points in fighting were an abstract. Now, I understand today that there's lots of people that really get into, and we've got a question coming up later, into the minutiae, as I would refer to it, of fighting. That's fine. For me, fighting is an abstract. I'm about the story, I'm about the problems, the situations, and the solutions. That's what my games are like. That's what my games are about. I use the simple hit points. How often how long is it before you can no longer evade a fatal blow? So, because let's look at it realistically. Okay, you're gonna fight um, an 8 foot tall ogre who outweighs you by 220 pounds. He's gonna gotta hit you once to bust you up. I mean, bust you up. So we abstracted it all. He's going to hit you, but how bad does it hurt you? Enough of those hits eventually, i.e., the hit points whittled away. You can't dodge. That big maul head hits you in the side of the ribs, caves in your rib cage, and pierces your heart, and you're dead. Um, if it works for you, I've never said, change something that works for you. If your players like it, fine. I know groups that play evil crap all the time, and that's what they like to do. And most of them aren't evil guys. That's their Jekyll and Hyde coming out. If it works, if that system works for you, fine. It's really hard to say what something would look like if you went back all these years and changed it, 45 years and changed it. Who knows? Because all the evolution, all the growth, all of the seeds that the original tree put off and sprung up would all be different too. Who knows? Probably not anything we'd even recognize. But that's the fun of speculation. And here we go to the minutiae nitty gritty of combat. With regards to weapon speed to determine initiative or break ties, I feel the weapon length should also be a factor, and possibly more so. In my campaign, each weapon has a length or two alternate lengths for two-handed weapons whose grip can be modified. Initiative in melee is determined by length, either progressing from longest to shortest in most conventional engagements, or from shortest to longest in surprise or cramped conditions where shorter, faster weapons have the advantage. Hey, that's great if it works for you. If that's the way your guys play and your group play, when I say guy, keep in mind, ladies that might be listening to this, I'm using the old-fashioned, non-specific terms here. If that's the way your players like to play, and they're happy with it, then it's right. Anything that works for your group is right. If it works for your group, it's not wrong. Now, there might be something better, but that's subjective, not for me to say. But this again is the minutia, the nitty gritty. Now, I understand minutia. I used to be a bolt counter, as they're called in tankers. One of the great dirty, dark secrets at TSR in 78 and 79, TSR, the fantasy company, trying to be science fiction, a little bit of historic. The fantasy company, it was how we were branded. Two of the leading lights, if I may call myself one of them, the other one being Dave Trampier, Tramp, the great artist. We were closet tankers. We played World War II armor incessantly, almost every weekend at my house on my sand table. And we were into armor thickness and gun velocities and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I understand what it's like to be a bolt counter. I just don't take it, I don't apply it in this circumstance. And see, I see no need to do that. Combat, I like to abstract, just as I like to abstract damage. I don't get into lopping off limbs and fingers and what have you, except as circumstance might dictate. Now, obviously, if you trigger a scythe trap that comes out of the wall and hits you right in the Adam's apple, it's going to cut your head off and kill you instantly. It's going to be however many hit points you need to die. But other than that, no, I don't get into the specifics and the particulars. If you do, that's fine. Whatever your group is into, whether it's intricate combat and the intricacies of which weapon's better than this and which armor's better against which weapon, that's fine. That's swell. Whatever makes your group happy. If your group's happy, you're doing it right. Okay, now I had a confusing thing last year or last last year, I wish, last week, that I wasn't able to understand about max hit point level 1. Okay, what he wrote back and said what he meant was that if you start somebody back out, then you get all the hit points that are available at level 1. So if you go back and start as a level 1, you get all 6 or all 8 of your points, or whatever you're entitled to. Now, I've done that when we've been using an average die, and if they come back at level 3, I'll give them max hit points on the first 2 levels, and then they got to roll for the third. It's just a slightly artificial bump to let one of your friends, who's, it's probably one of your friends you're playing with, to let them back into the game so they don't feel left out. They don't have to go home early or whatever. If it's at a convention, well, they're dead. Too bad. Let's see. Okay. I mentioned Viking War of Clans last week, and how I didn't know how I was supposed to save, and so I'd been running idling on the bar for 3 days, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. And so on the 4th day, after I came home, we went out to grocery shop that morning, came home, ate lunch, went downstairs, and my entire garrison had been wiped out. I have no idea how, I have no idea where. I had these 2 notices that such and such a fight had happened at such and such a place, which I have no idea where it was, and that I had lost. So I'm thinking it must have been one of the little satellite camp things that I took early on. And so after 3 days of meticulously training, raising troops, training them up, increasing my military knowledge so my troops were better, they all died when I wasn't there. So Polarian Games can pucker up and kiss my rosy red butt. That's ridiculous. Spend 3 days. And it wasn't just, once or twice each day. No. What a piece of crap. All right. I'll never get involved in one of those big monster things again. All right. We touched on a nerve, on informed consent. What can you talk about? And in this person's, in my humble opinion, regardless of what kind of gaming group is agreed upon by players and GMs, honest communication is important before starting. Absolutely. Which is why every time I run a game that has, every time I run a game that I'm not sure of the players. Today's games, for instance, before we even started, everybody let me know that I had an entire table full of veterans of various British branches of service. So we immediately had a bond level, and that immediately gave me a cue as to where we might go or not go. And I simply said, as I always do, hey guys, if we go anywhere that makes anybody uncomfortable, just indicate that and we'll steer off in another direction. I would expect to get that a lot less frequently from a all-male group, but and I'm honest when I say, tell me, say something, raise your hand, whatever, and we'll go somewhere else. I don't believe you have to sit down and sign a piece of paper, because no piece of paper is going to cover every possible contingency. This piece of paper is way too damn long. Yeah, you. In my opinion, the only time you have to take this kind of stuff into consideration is when you're running a group for strangers at a convention, at a game meeting, at whatever. You got a bunch of new players in your group for their first time, certainly. But after a while, I think any group that plays together for any length of time at all gets an innate sense of what's cool and what isn't, where you can go with it and where you can't. So we had several off-color jokes today in our game. Nothing offensive to anybody. I made a couple of poor word choices, which they eagerly jumped on. So we had a great time. Nobody's sensibilities were offended, and no problem. Now, the last time I ran, well, it's 2 times ago when I ran online, I had two young boys, 10 and 12, from Belfast. And so obviously I toned and tailored my remarks to reflect that fact. I'm not going to make smarmy woo 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 with the eyebrow jokes with a couple of 10 or 12-year-olds in the group. I'm not going to do that. So I try, and I've had more experience than most. I admit that. I try to tailor how the game goes based on the sensibilities and the sensitivities of the people at my table. Um, that's all I can recommend to anybody. You don't want to piss off one of your regulars and have them come back, because that diminishes your group. And your gaming group should never be diminished except by death, and we don't wish that on anybody. And hopefully you can keep adding to it. Okay, now, all right. I don't know what it is, but there seems to be some sort of fascination on what's behind my head. So I'm going to give you a little treat tonight. I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to put my spotlight, many game books, rule books, a picture of me with Joe Manganiello, Sofia Vergara, at a art auction that I met them at a couple of years back. There's the hamster from Hamster in a Blender, if any of you remember that online, sick cartoons. There, that what looks to be part of a cigar box is the very first dice box ever used playing D&D anywhere. I verified that with Gary when he was alive, and others that have been playing forever and ever. And then there's some other books and adventures and stuff down here, and there's all kinds of books and references over here. And so, no, I'm not going to do a black and white crayon drawing so you can fill in the blanks and figure out what it was. And what you can't see is way up above. I don't know if I can move my camera far enough. Got to reach up here. Way up there are the stuffed animals from Gamehole Convention, all but the Mimic, which is a box with legs, obviously. And, oh, look at that. Well, yeah, but now you can't see me, so I got to do that again. No, that's not right. Anyway, that's just a little peek of what's back there for all the yous that are just seeming some kind of voyeur that want to know what's back there. Well, that's a little too high. Try it there. Oh, that's about right. I got to remember, don't do that again in the middle. Uh, so anyway, and that burning question is answered. Okay, now I'm going to dispute something with somebody who wrote this in. Gary not wanting magic users to run roughshod over the game. Laugh out loud. That's funny because I thought the 1980s target market for D&D was awkward 13-year-olds raised on seeing action movies of the 80s, Rambo, Commando, Raiders of the Lost Ark, etc. Yes, all fighters. None of those guys are magic users. With all sorts of explosions and massive cataclysmic fire and stuff. Right, all fighters. None of those guys are magic users. Back in those days, we wanted characters that could drop dragons out of the sky with magic artillery, such as fireballs, frostballs, lightning bolt, thunder flatulence. I'm glad I didn't play in that game, and other methods. Okay, but you don't have to be a magic user to do that. You could be doing that with wands and staves. Okay, ironically, also interesting was that Gary played magic users. According to TSR 1980, the Rogues Gallery, two high-level magic users, Mordenkainen and Rigby, are listed as Gary's player characters. Gary and Ron went on to publish Mordekainen's Fantastic Adventure, TSR Incorporated 1984. Well, the first thing I would recommend on the TSR 1984 is look at the timeline and see if that was one of the times that Gary wasn't with the company and they were putting out anything they could find that had D&D on the front of it, including the splat books and all that kind of stuff, because they were desperate to gin up the sales and keep them up there. I would check that. I have a feeling there's some of that aspect in that. Yeah, Gary had Mordenkainen and Bigby. Bigby and Mordenkainen, if you look carefully through the old spells, they had spells that were named after them. They were original characters. And I believe that they got so high so fast is one of the reasons that Gary said, whoa, let's slow this down a little bit. And I can only tell you this. More than 24 times, Gary told me he did not want magic users dominating. More, you can find at least 12 times on various interviews Gary did, either written or verbal, that he didn't want magic users to dominate the game. So I'm only telling you the truth of what Gary wanted. All right, now I'm going to dispute this. Why study historical bad guys and make and emulate D&D villains similar to them? Okay, this individual wanted to know why I didn't use Herman Goering as a big bad guy. Okay, number one, he was a despicable slug of a human being, and in no way would I want to do anything that would bring him back to any kind of attention except as a historical aberrant in a historical aberrant society that was National Socialism. He was a pedophile, a drug addict, a swaggering bully. I don't need that image to make a bad guy. I can make my own. I'm certainly not going to pattern anybody off somebody as despicable a human being as any of the Nazis. Not going there. I don't need to. Why? That would be my question. Why? It wasn't that the whole invincible overlord in the city-state of the Union. No, he was not based on an amalgamation of bad guys. He was the overlord. The overlord is the overlord. He's the overlord. He makes the laws. He determines what's good, what's bad, whatever. And no, I know the guys that put together that module at the Judges Guild, and he was just this mythical, amorphous, non-specific overlord. He was the overlord. And yeah, if you got into the palace intrigues and all that kind of stuff, you could work your way up through major domos and chamberlains and eunuchs, and maybe get a audience with him, maybe. Okay, now this is like clickbait, but it's so silly. I'm just going to respond to it. Roll a d4 or take your pick. Which item would you prefer to end up with in a game or in real life? Well, we're going to take out a real life because obviously it's not going to work. Number one, transferable between the living only, evil third eye. 2, a flint and steel that produces sparks of water instead of flame. Well, that's lame. Number 3, a mouse that can eat a horse but never get bigger. Well, we've got purple worms and carrion crawlers and to dispose of corpses, so I don't understand why that would be good. And a fractured wand of fracture fixing, which may cause fractures to appear. I think I'd have more fun with that one. But I don't know, anyway. Okay, now, next one. Somebody wants to create a career criminal character class. we used to have one and we called it thieves. They were minor criminals. then we made nastier criminals and we called them assassins. What class and alignment would you assign to a career criminal? Well, now, are we talking misdemeanors or are we talking felonies? And if we're talking felony 4 or felony 1, obviously, you're not going to be good. I would say at least neutral, leaning toward evil, or just evil, bad. In this case, evil is bad, not good. It's evil to break laws. Now, as far as lawful or neutral or chaotic, that would be purely decided by the individual character's personality. Career criminal, well, I would say this, that career criminals might be fun to play for a while, but when justice catches up to you, you could be summarily executed upon capture because there's a capital warrant out on you. So I would think that you might mull over your choices before you decide to become a career criminal. So no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. They would just be an evil bad guy who would bring no ire upon whoever knocked him off and brought their head in and collected the reward. That's the other thing about being a career criminal. If you start out and you're really successful, eventually there's going to be rewards out. And eventually the reward's going to be so high that one of your own party members is going to turn you in for it. Whoever you make the most uneasy, uncomfortable with your antics is going to turn your butt in and collect the money. And boy, I know dozens of groups where that would happen in a heartbeat. You know, like a flock of grackles. They're just waiting for one to show weakness so they can all peck it to death. I'm going to make this statement now based on something that was posted. My comments are for comments about gaming and what we talked about in previous curmudgeons. I don't want to hear your phony bullshit right-wing crap. I don't want you ranting on about facts not in existence or making claims that are easily refuted. That's not what that's not what my videos are for. I've refrained from making my videos political, nor do I plan on doing a political video because why bother? The long nightmare is over. But I don't want political shit. I certainly don't want virus deniers. I know people that have had it. I know at least one person of the few that I've known that's having long-term effects. So you can deny it all you want. People that stick their head in the sand are just asking to get something stuffed up their ass. Post another thing like that on my thread and clench. Okay. The best thing I can say is the complaints you got about woke comes from the intersectionals. This is good. It's long, but I'm going to read it because it's interesting. Think of the Moonies or Scientology when you see their behavior. They're dead set that their beliefs are the best. If anyone disagrees with them, you must be a Nazi. And they're also very small. About 8% of the U.S. population follow those faiths. They want to have control over popular culture and icons. I'd give them the respect they deserve and not engage with them. They have some rather weird ideas going on and have gotten some attention from WotC. My favorite instance of WotC giving that group attention is WotC labeling all D&D content as essentially being racist and wrong from 4th edition and earlier on. Then the DM's Guild to placate said group. And you'll hear from the intersectional faith, well, WotC did say might to deflect from that insult laid out on a lot of good writers in the past, but I don't care for it myself. Common sense says you treat people right You have fun at your table, and when someone wants to exert control of everything at the table, ask them if they want to DM now and see how it goes. I did that once at my table. He took me up on it, and at the end of the session, based on his sensibilities, the party asked him not to come back to the table again and please have me DM. Woke views are really restrictive and more times than not take away from the enjoyment of the game. No one plays D&D for politics. We just want to kill orcs. That's right. Basically, what is D&D adventuring? Killing shit and taking their stuff. That's what it's all about. I hope you had a decent Thanksgiving. That's all the topics. Cheryl and I spent ours alone. We didn't want to get the whole 12 of us all together at one place. We're still under restrictions for size and gatherings in Ohio. So I'd rather have another Thanksgiving to celebrate. We are all going to get together at Christmas, come hell or high water. But in the meantime, the election bullshit's over. He's going to have to be rooted out or he's going to leave, whichever. It doesn't matter anymore. As long as he doesn't push the button before he leaves, it's over. Not going there anymore. Wear a mask, for Christ's sakes. Every single state that is spiking had mask issues. They either issued orders for masks way later than the rest of the country, or they didn't enforce it. Kentucky, right across the river, 20 minutes drive from where I live, 20, 25 minutes from Kentucky. They've closed everything down, at 10 o'clock or earlier. There's no inside dining because people were being idiots. So please don't be an idiot. Wear your mask, suck it up, wash your hands a lot. Wearing a mask and washing your hands, it will help a lot. Sneezing into your elbow helps the rest of us. We'll get through this. The vaccine's on the way. 6-8 weeks, I might even be eligible one, only because I have a compromised immune system. I'd rather not, I'll put it that way, be eligible, but it looks like I might be. So you can bet your butt I'm going to sign up, stick that thing in my arm, you betcha. I've gotten every other vaccination or inoculation that made sense. So this one is by far the one that makes the most sense in my lifetime. So please take care of yourself, stay safe, and remember, if you want to make comments, that's what the comment sections are for. If you're going to make political diatribes, the next time you do it, I'll name you. I'll try to figure out who you actually are, not just your screen name. And I will name you by name if you persist. Don't like to be a hard ass, but that's the way it is. So for the 149th time officially, from my cellar, I'll say, Dodata Govi. Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when the rates went down. Called in Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard brain. Be a CSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory, tight with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.